Brilliant. Okay, look, thank you very much for attending today. My name is Simon Rowell. I head up market development in the Future Networks program at DSIT. We've got a pretty packed agenda this afternoon, sorry. And I think really what we want to try and achieve today is give everyone that sort of in-person overview of what we're trying to achieve with the ONE competition. We've got some great speakers. We've got the team from the Future Networks program that will go through the competition in detail, and then we've got some consortium pitches later on. If we just look at the agenda today, we've got an introduction by Keith Bullock, who's the Programme Director of the FMP programme in a second, followed by a UK TIN introduction by Nick, which will be giving that sort of context of UK TIN. We then go into an overview of the competition and look at the different elements of that, starting with HDD, high density demand, the RIC and software automation piece, silicon, RF and RAN hardware. We'll then go into a break because that'd be quite a lot of information to go through for that bit. We'll then look at how to apply, so the dynamics of the competition, how you can get involved if there are interest there, and the sort of things you need to be aware of around that. We're going to follow up with a Q&A because I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions that people have based on what they've heard earlier. And then really we're going to look at that consortium building. So there's going to be a number of pitches that Bob Driver's going to chair for people who may want to work with other members in the audience and beyond. And I think that will be very interesting to hear. So that's effectively what we're going to do this afternoon. There are no fire alarms planned, so if you do hear a fire alarm, it is real. We have a muster point at the back, at the left, just at the rear, but there's also plenty of exits here and to the rear, so hopefully it should be all okay. And with that, I'd like to welcome Keith Bullock, who is the Programme Director for the Future Networks Programme. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Fantastic to see so many people here. Welcome also to the people joining us online. So, as Simon says, yes, I'm Keith Bullock from the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology, a newly formed department, I should say. And I'm Programme Director for the Future Network Programme, so that's the 5G Testbeds and Trials Programme, which I know many of you here will be familiar with, which is just coming to its end, and the Open Networks Programme, which is, I'd say, about halfway through, and this Open Networks ecosystem competition represents our final push on that and is our biggest amount of funding we're releasing in one go so far. It's a coincidence that that's happened at the same time as we've moved from DCMS to DSIT, but I'm also, along with the team, very hopeful that it is a sign that we will be able to have more funding, more often, with more certainty, and give you all a much greater line of sight as to what our intentions are around policy and how R&D funding will stem for that in the whole telecoms area. So, in a moment I'll hand over to Nick from UK Telecoms Innovation Network. They're really important to us. Their job, among many other things, is to keep us in touch with the real world, with the market, with the businesses, with academia, with the vendor organizations, to make sure that the competitions we're launching are relevant and are likely to be of interest. And of course, they're also a resource and will become increasingly a resource for everyone else as well, because one of the jobs is to try and make it easier to signpost where the support from government is and to guide you towards it. So a key role for UK TIN for us. As Simon said, plenty of people from the Future Networks Programme team here. And I think if nothing else today, I would urge you to talk to them. These are people who have read a lot of bids over the years. They know what good bids look like. They know all about the rules of engagement, and they know what working with government on these things is like. And on that point, I think there's a couple of things for us. I think we're always learning, inevitably. We are trying to be easier to deal with as an organization, but we do have, I think it's important everybody comes into this eyes open, that taking money from our department in this area isn't quite the same as taking it from some other parts of government. And there's a couple of reasons for that. I just thought it's worth mentioning these. One is that we are very closely tied to policy teams. So we don't sit alone, and we're not just doing R&D for its general goodness. We are doing R&D triggered by very specific policy objectives. And so we care a lot about what happens in these projects. We're very actively interested in them and are resourced with our technical experts and other teams to sort of engage throughout. So that's one reason why we tend to stay closer. Another is that this is part of what's called the government major projects portfolio. It means it's right there up with things like HS2 and things like that, believe it or not, in terms of the amount of scrutiny it attracts. And that inevitably has some pass-on effects and demands on our team to make sure we are doing this right, that we are spending money or giving grants appropriately, and that we are keeping track of how things are going. So there is an overhead, important to be aware of that. We are trying to minimize it. But there are a couple of things. So for example, so if you can talk to the team today, we've got the technical people, we've got Dale from the commercial side, we've got lots of people with lots of experience, and we have lots of top tips. For example, there are things about time pressure. It's bounded in a way which isn't always very helpful for an R&D project. We are very strict on the financial years, and we're very strict on the end point too. It will pay off hugely for you to have a project manager and a finance professional ready to go from the moment you are notified. There's one thing we have learned so clearly with our projects. So please bear that in mind. And there are other things too, just to bear in mind. I would say, take a look in the whole package of information you've been given. There is, I think there is our grant agreement, our grant funding agreement, the GFA, as we abbreviate it to. This isn't a negotiable thing, so please don't wait till you've won the bid before you take a look at that. Really useful to get the lawyers to look at that and make sure it's okay. It's worked for us on how many now? 70 odd projects over the last 5 years. So it is rarely used in anger. It does work, but we don't really have time to negotiate it. So these are the types of things I hope we'll get a chance to talk to you about today. I'll be around for the rest of the afternoon. Like I say, there's a whole bunch of us from the team just sitting here, wanting to answer your questions and wanting to encourage you to bid into this competition. Okay, so I hope this afternoon gives you all the information that you need, that you do find it all helpful and encouraging. And I'll hand over to Nick.
Thanks, Keith. So today is convened by the UK Telecoms Innovation Network. It's right in the centre of our agenda to organise events like this, to bring the innovation community of the UK together and have it pointing in the right direction towards common goals. And I'll talk a bit about what that really means over the next couple of slides. But in terms of we are convening the meeting, we are not reviewing the applications. So if you've got complaints about lunch, complain to us. But complaints about anything else, it's somebody else. Okay, it's not our money, just for the avoidance of doubt. Right, so first slide, please. In your own time. Do I have to click it? Dear, oh dear, oh dear. Every day's a school day, right? Yeah. Okay, so that's me, Nick Johnson. I've been in the job 6 weeks. I think that's the last time I'm going to mention how long I've been in the job, because it's starting to get boring. So what's the UK Telecoms Innovation Network started its life really in the Telecom Diversity Task Force report from 2021. And in there you'll see, if you read that cover to cover, you'll see a lot of the themes which have recurred over the next couple of years and reappeared in the UK TIN competition, which we succeeded at and which I joined earlier this year. And we'll see those themes in a second. But it was formed in response to a view of the R&D, or the innovation community in the UK that looked a bit like this. Just all of the concerned entities, all looking in rather different directions, all moving in rather different directions. Inward investment was rather mystified. Unless you were actually already established in the UK, knowing where to spend your money was a difficult question for many people interested in investing in innovation in the UK. And the other thing that's wrong with this picture, which we'll put right in the next one, is there's no customer in this. There's no kind of orientation of this R&D effort in a common direction. And that's, again, one of the most important things that UK TIN is nudging to put things in the right direction. So lining up all of these entities in a common direction, something I've been calling true north. Of course, in this direction, it looks a bit more like true east, but you get the idea. Everybody looking towards the goals of the customer community, right? So that means globally, not just in the UK, but globally, all of the fixed and mobile, large telcos, all of the towercos, all the system integrators, all the non-terrestrial network operators, that's to say satellite operators, all of the private shared neutral host operators that may be small beer today, but tomorrow, who knows? There are, I think Ofcom announced their 1,000th shared spectrum license earlier this year. This is a growing segment that's really important. And of course, one of the customers for all of this is UK policy making, right? So we can't forget, as Keith mentioned earlier, this is all has a policy agenda that it's meeting, right? So we'll see a bit more about that. And then of course, over in the left-hand side there, getting investment organized so that it knows where to go. Where does the money go to make these engines start to turn, start to pick up speed? This is our goal, if you like, from a UK TIN point of view. And how are we going to achieve that? We're going to achieve that in a bunch of work packages. So these are the 6 important ones here on the slide. Of course, it's communications is key, and this is part of our agenda today, is to communicate the innovation agenda of the UK and oil the wheels of that in as much as we can with a series of events such as this over the 2 years of the program, the remaining 2 years of the program. The front door service, so this was a name that was first used in that telecom diversity report, was reused in a report that DSIT or DCMS commissioned, which many of you may have taken part in, to understand the importance of having a single front door for the UK innovation community, lining that up in an online way, so like a Google search engine database of databases that enumerates and makes searchable, makes findable, makes discoverable all of the R&D resources of the UK, whether that's from a production point of view or a consumption point of view, as well as that providing human specialist guidance to customers, to companies, including customers who are interested in investing in R&D in the UK. Shaping the long-term R&D agenda of the UK, UK TIN's convening a series of special interest groups, that's to say expert working groups, who are providing impartial, inclusive input in the research abilities of the UK, the gaps in the UK, but most importantly, the key objectives of the customer community. So the operators in all of their stripes, as we saw on the previous slide, UK TIN's objective is to make sure the R&D community, the innovation community in the UK, is serving that customer community in a global context. And related to that, we talked about policy objectives, supply chain diversity, incredibly important still from a UK point of view. Globally, to be honest, all of many countries are looking at this from this point of view. And so that mapping the UK innovation capability there and translating that into product then becomes key to diversifying the supply chain, the supply base for telecoms networks generally around the world. And then, of course, none of that would be complete if we didn't think about adoption and, to a large extent, the skills gap that exists, again noted in the 2021 report, the skills gap that means that we can do all the innovation we like. If we can't deploy it, we're just wasting our time, right? So let's make sure that skills gap is plugged from the schools. That's a little bit outside of our agenda, but we need to think about how we're going to get that going in schools, but through the regions or nations of the UK in all of the elements of deployment that are important to cover. So that's a kind of 20,000 foot view of the UK TIN activities here to bring innovation back, aligned up into the service of UK PLC and global PLC generally. So that's my overview of UK TIN. I'm around all afternoon, as we all are, I think. So I can take questions on that whenever you like. Thanks for your attention, and that's it from me for now.
Thank you very much, Nick and Keith, for those introductions. So now we're going to get on to, I guess, the main event, which is the competition. I guess the first thing to say is that, we've been thinking about the name of this for some time, and I know that everyone likes, DSIT to come up with a good name for their competitions and the different elements. But actually, the One competition does actually explain where we are on the journey, I think, because it is one competition involving a number of areas to advance the ecosystem. As some people like to call it, they like to call it the one show competition, but we're not going to, we're going to stick with the one competition as a name. We've taken all the objectives that policy had, our policy colleagues had, over the last 6 months, 12 months, and really tried to crystallize that into what this competition will look like. And they have been set their objectives by, the government, number 10. They have to translate that into, they have to do their research and translate that into strategic objectives and policy. And then they hand it to us as the program team to look how a competition can be developed around this. And as part of that journey, we've probably engaged with well over 100 organizations, I would say, both in the UK and overseas. We engaged with a lot at Mobile World Congress and other conferences leading up to this point, and many more individuals as well. So we've tested these concepts, I would say, in a lot of detail. And that's important because, it's all very well having the objectives that we need to adhere to and move forward, but we also need to make sure that we bring the market with us. We have to make sure that the market will work with us and we can evolve this together, because I think that's going to lead, and we all believe that's going to lead to the best result all round. And as part of that, we had a workshop in January. Many of you in the room were at that workshop, and we tested all the specific themes in a lot of detail. We had a huge amount of feedback. People were telling us certain elements wouldn't work, the market's not ready for that, or actually encouraged us and said, actually, we should do more of one thing as opposed to something else. And that was hugely encouraging, because then we could refine the elements of this in a lot more detail. And really what that meant is that we have quite a bit of confidence now, I would say, in the 3 themes that we've developed. The first, as mentioned, is high density demand, which Graham's going to talk about in a lot more detail after this. And it's really just trying to see where we can prove open architecture in a high dense environment. And, there are players in the market that are looking at this, are doing things in this space at the moment, but we believe this could be slightly accelerated. We believe this could evolve maybe a bit quicker. And we want, obviously, part of this competition to focus on that. And we know already from the feedback we've got, there is quite a bit of interest in looking at this already, which is obviously very encouraging to us. The second element is around the RIC. We know there are a lot of RIC developments going on. We know that a lot of companies have already developed one, but we specifically want to look at the open interface at a near real-time or real-time environment, which is less developed in the market. We know there are certain projects going on around this, but it is less evolved. And we believe by having this strand as part of the One competition, we can accelerate that as well. And we would obviously be, very happy if there are people that would like to develop this further and look at this in more detail. And Freddie's going to talk about that in a lot more detail after this. And then the final element is around RF hardware and RF components. We know that there are various interoperability issues around this at the moment. We know there are supply chain issues. not just in this country, but in other countries as well, and not just in radio-related environments, but other areas of technology and telecoms as well. But we believe we can just push this boundary a little bit further as well. We know there are certain organizations out there that are looking at this, and we believe that this funding can hopefully help accelerate that. And Joe is going to talk in a lot more detail about this element of the competition. So one of the obvious questions is, can we combine elements of this together? Do we just have to bid for one part of the competition, or can we, say, look at a RIC development in an HDD environment? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. We would like to receive a wide variety of bids. It could involve all three elements, potentially. It could involve just one theme, but we are open to ideas on this. So if there are organizations or consortium out there with different ideas on this, we're absolutely open to hearing about that, and we would encourage that as well. And really, as mentioned, as Keith mentioned, we want to advance the UK open ecosystem. We want to advance this as much as we can. We're not going to achieve everything, we understand that. It may not actually be achieved in our timescales, but we believe we can move the dial, and that's been proven with the previous programs that we've had. It's been proven with the Tranche 1 interventions, with Sonic Labs, with UK TIN, with the UK Telecoms Lab being launched, and other elements as well, such as Frank. So we know we can move this forward in the right way, and we hope and believe that actually the one competition can help achieve this. So the value is up to 80 million. That is the budget we have, and it's available for all UK registered entities. James from the program development team is going to talk about the dynamics of the competition in a lot more detail, because we know there's going to be a lot of questions around that and the intricacies of applying and how best to do that to get the best result. Competition closes on the 23rd of May. So, a quick sum is telling everyone that that's roughly 8 weeks away. So it is short. It's not a long competition. We have parameters that we need to, fit into, and therefore, we are looking at a short competition period. So I encourage everyone, again, as Keith mentioned, to look at this very seriously and quickly. Look at who you might want to work with, get project managers involved, get budget finance people involved, and really take this seriously from today, if you haven't already, if you are interested in applying to this, because it is a short window. From the end of May, we will go into a moderation phase. So the DSIT team looking at this will take all the bids, and we hope there'll be many, and we will start moderating each one based on strict scores. We have certain rules that we have to adhere to, and therefore that phase will probably last around 4 weeks, about a month to moderate that. One of the key people in that process will be Dale. He's head of our commercial in DSIT. He's going to sit on the Q&A panel, and obviously he's here if there's any questions around sort of the intricacies and rules and regulations of that. Notification to successful parties will be end of June. So, 23rd of May, deadline, moderation phase, and then parties informed by the end of June. And we're looking to mobilize on that by the end of summer, early September. So again, these are quick timescales, but we believe that, from feedback we've heard as well, people actually enjoy that. They want things to get going, and we've got timescales internally as well. And then really, that's the competition at a very high level. As I mentioned, James is going to talk about a lot more detail around it, because I'm sure it's led to a lot more questions from everyone here. We do have a Q&A session after the break. That will be involving the theme leads around all three areas. It'll be involving commercial, some of our technical advisors, and James, again, who's looking at the overall competition. So again, if there's any questions around that, please use the Q&A period for that. We've also got a central mailbox. So if you forget about something and then you want to ask something when you've got home or later on in the week, you can email that mailbox and we will get back to you, from that. And again, that's very similar to previous competitions that we've run around that. So that just gives you a quick overview of that. Please do take it seriously. It is a good opportunity. And, we believe that, we can obviously advance what we need to do as a government, and we hope that the market can advance some of your objectives as well as part of this. So thank you very much. Graham, let's go into a bit more detail on HDD. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. And good afternoon. Hello, everybody. High demand density. We thought we'd start with an easy one for everybody. My name's Jen Fuss. I'm the program development lead on high density environments. Today, I'm going to tell you a bit about why we've chosen to make these environments a central part of the ONE competition, and also talk to you about what we're looking for in bids. So, historically, high demand density, or HDD environments, dense urban areas or airports, sports venues, major public events, they've proven themselves to be vitally important drivers for growth and innovation in telecoms in a way that maybe far outstrips their geographical size. And maybe this is because they represent some of the most challenging environments for the performance of any mobile network. Technically, we know they're quite tricky. So coping with high density of demand for connection of data alongside high levels of user mobility can for many networks mean stretching their capabilities to the limits. And commercially, they're really high impact. When people are at a football match or a festival or a train station and they just can't get connection to meet up with people or to share their experience, they really remember that. And they really bear that in mind when they're making their next purchasing decisions for which mobile network they want. Which is why we've heard from network operators they have the highest levels of performance expectations for products used under high density conditions, and why historically we've seen products or solutions developed high density environments then percolate across the ecosystem and improve the quality experience for all mobile customers. Today, high density is only growing in importance to most network operators, even though, it depends how you define it, but we think roughly 1% of the UK landmass covered by mobile networks could be classified as high density. They drive a vastly greater proportion of mobile traffic. We think perhaps 20%. By the end of the decade, we think that geographically, HDD areas will have maybe doubled in size, and the traffic density in these areas will also have doubled. Yearly data traffic could rise maybe 5 or 10 times. So all of which is why we can't really talk about driving Open RAN take-up without also looking head-on at the requirements of HDD environments, which is what we're hoping to do through the ONE competition. On the one hand, we're helping industry. We want industry to evidence the areas in which Open RAN solutions are already at or are close to parity with proprietary solutions when it comes to high-density environments. On the other, where there are gaps in Open RAN performance, we're hoping that the competition can help close these gaps and move Open RAN solutions closer to performance levels seen elsewhere. And we're asking for bids to do this in 3 ways. First, we want the deployment of a mobile network in a live HDD-like environment. So this deployment environment should be capable of testing or demonstrating aspects of Open RAN performance equivalent to a public-facing mobile network. So while the deployment environment could be a public-facing mobile network, it could also be another environment which offers a reasonable proxy for the types of challenge faced by a mobile public-facing network. So this could, for example, include use of private networks or fixed wireless access or neutral hosting, providing they're carrying or could be induced to carry levels of traffic or mobility comparable to high-end public environments. We also want to see, as part of any bid, an element of testing, evaluation, optimization. And finally, we want to see a solid approach to sharing and determination of lessons learned that adds value to the wider industry. That might include looking where we can use UK TIN, for example. Now, I'll come back to a few of these things towards the end, but I just wanted to next look at what we mean by high density in a bit more detail. And technically, what we think high density environments have in common is that they involve 4 things. High user densities. So lots of active users in a particular place at the same time. and this puts intense demand on a network. High traffic densities, so high data volumes per square meter, because people in high density situations tend to do lots of things like social networking or video streaming. Third, and linked to this, high density areas can have high peak and average data uplink and downlink rates, which can cause network congestion. The fourth feature is maybe high levels of mobility and large volumes of handover between adjacent cells, layers, frequency bands. And these types of characteristics can be seen, yes, in dense urban areas, but also specific locations such as airports, sports venues, railway stations, underground stations, major public events, festivals, crowded beaches in the summer, maybe research centres, maybe some factories, public events, South Bank on New Year's Eve. There are quite a few places like this. That said, it's quite important to recognise that not all HDD environments are the same. And the exact profile depends on the deployment context. So, for example, a crowded sports stadium could well have a higher average user density than a train station and different uplink and downlink usage. So these characteristics, has worked okay, mean that networks can have specific and high expectations for RAN functionality in HDD areas over and above those for the rest of their networks. These include things like the need to support multi-layer cell architectures and for sharing of bands, bandwidths, and networks. The need to take account of challenging power consumption, weight, size constraints, and to support the highest spectrum efficiencies. The need for high-performance features that support things like energy saving, carrier aggregation, load balancing, and account for high levels of user mobility. And features that also enable operators to respond to a wide range of RIC and software management requirements. So in your bids for the ONE competition, you'll be expected to demonstrate how Open RAN solutions specifically can meet these high expectations of network operators and overcome some of the traditional barriers to adoption. And in this section, I'm going to look at maybe some of the issues you might want to consider with your bids based on our conversations with industry and the insight we've had to date. This is very much non-definitive. Your views may well differ. I'm sure they will, but the goal here is just to get you thinking. So first, thinking about perhaps performance and feature parity. How could you help demonstrate the extent to which Open RAN equipment is already able to match, or maybe close to matching, the performance and feature sets demanded by network operators for HDD environments? You could look at this through various lenses. So, for example, energy efficiency or quality of experience, electromechanical performance, spectrum efficiency, and throughput. Or if there are known to be performance gaps, how might you use this competition to close these gaps and move Open RAN solutions close to the performance levels expected by networks? So, for example, thinking about energy and spectrum efficiency. It's an area in which Open RAN solutions have been said sometimes to lag behind traditional RAN, in part due to reliance on COP servers. If this were the case, then bids could look at how that gap could be closed. So, for example, through RICs or XApp development, or improving the energy efficiency of power amplifiers, or considering the use of advanced chipsets like ASICs. Second area could be looking at managing user mobility. So as we've seen, large numbers of users on the move can place pressure on networks in areas such as handover management and load balancing. So your competition bid might therefore include exploring the extent to which existing Open RAN solutions could be put through their paces in this area. For example, you could test or demonstrate mobility in a live HD environment between different RU and DU vendors. Or again, if there are gaps, obvious gaps in performance around mobility, you might look at how you can test for this and start to close the gaps. So in hardware, it could look at maybe testing interoperability between macro cells and small cells. And software, you might look at the role that the RIC and XApps could play in load balancing and traffic management. Third area of challenge might be RAN hardware architecture. In particular, we know that in HDD areas, massive MIMO features and performance can be seen by MNOs as key for managing the macro network. So to what extent could a live demonstration test the extent to which Open RAN MIMO solutions can achieve or move towards performance parity with traditional equipment, including around areas such as size or weight or power or capacity. And looking at areas for improvement, hardware or software could play a part in this. So again, maybe using RIC or XApps or ASICs, alternative high-performance chipsets to improve power efficiency and flexibility, perhaps looking at some of the standards that underpin these things too. Or even to flip things slightly, you might want to explore whether alternative network architectures such as small cells or neutral host or FWA could represent a viable alternative to MIMO in HDD areas. So 2 final points here. First, systems integration. To what extent are there particular SI challenges that are particular or unique to HDD environments? If there are challenges, how might these be tested and overcome as part of a bid focused on demonstration testing? Are there, for example, potential security challenges specific to the use of Open RAN that your bid could explore? And let's not forget commercial and cultural challenges too. To what extent is total cost of ownership of Open RAN solutions a barrier to network take-up? Are there ways in which bids could help demonstrate comparable TCO for Open RAN to traditional RAN? There might be room for innovation in commercial models that support Open RAN or help open up Open RAN use cases in HDD environments. So, for example, around shared hosting. So hopefully this provides a bit of food for thought, demonstrates the sorts of bids we might find interesting, but as I said, it's by no means an exhaustive list, and we thoroughly welcome proposals focused on other challenge areas. So to wrap up, I'd like to come back to a few practical things about putting an HDD-focused bid together. So first, choosing a deployment environment. We do expect to see deployment of a network in a live environment. This environment should be chosen to enable testing of Open RAN solutions against one or more of the performance challenges faced by a public network in an HDD area. As I've said, these environments could include dense urban or transport hubs, train stations, public events, any areas in which there are issues of high user or traffic density mobility to consider. Well, obviously, this could be a live public network. There are other environments, as I've said, that could be proxies for this, such as private networks, FWA, neutral hosting. But if you do use a proxy environment, you must evidence in your bid how these relate to the sorts of challenge and performance requirements faced by mobile networks in public areas. For this, you might want to draw on our draft set of HDD technical guidelines, which we're hoping to publish shortly. Second, you might, as Simon was saying, you might want to look at links between HDD software and hardware themes. So as we've seen, there's a number of ways in which bids might suggest linking software and hardware development together as a means to which Open RAN solutions can reach or move towards the sort of performance levels expected in HDD areas. So we're therefore more than happy to consider bids that combine any elements of any or all of the 3 ONE competition strands. And my colleagues will talk more about hardware and software in a moment. Third, within your bids, we expect an element not just of deployment, but testing, evaluation, and where relevant, optimization performance. We want to see how you'll communicate the results of your trials in a way that will land with network clients. This might include via blogs or white papers, dissemination events. Finally, you can't do this without building a strong consortium. Typically, this consortium might consist of a network provider, a number of Open RAN solution vendors, bringing in hardware, software elements, and systems integration expertise. It'll be up to you to work out sort of what you think the optimum mix there is. You'll obviously need to find a usable deployment environment with a strong business case for resourcing the sorts of testing we're looking for. Think about how your partners might ensure that outputs are trusted by industry. So, for example, is there room there for independent testing? So I think that's it for me. Thank you very much for listening. We're really excited about this competition and its ability to create real change. I'll be up here, have to take questions later, either in person or through the mailbox. Good luck with everyone's bids. Thank you.
Thanks, Graham. I thought that was fantastic. And now I need to work out how to use this clickery thing. which should be pretty simple, hopefully. There we go. So hi everyone, I am Freddie Gelati, and I will be talking you through the RIC and software automation. So first of all, there's a slide here at the beginning, and there's a couple of slides at the end of my presentation, which are really for you to look at when we're going to provide the slides to you at the end, so you can kind of look through in a bit more detail at the text here. But fundamentally, it's important to understand that for this theme, we're interested in something quite specific, which is what we're calling the open near real-time RIC. And it's important to realize at the same time that although this is something which is quite a specific thing, and I'll go through the kind of how we got here and everything, at the same time, it may be the priority for this funding theme, but we're also keen to see any and all proposals in the field of software development, including those that are not related to the RIC, and those that dovetail with other themes in this competition, and I'll explain that in a second. So first of all, just to kind of give you the high-level overview, why are we investing in software? I think generally speaking, the government is really committed to investing in software in the UK, and especially when it comes to telecommunications. We've got leading strengths in software development and a great ecosystem in the UK, which you can draw on. We've got particular strengths in AI and machine learning. We've got fantastic globally leading academic institutions which have loads and loads of researchers in the software space, which I think are really useful for you when it comes to doing your R&D. And as I said, software is key to the future of telecommunications as we move forward into things like 6G. And it's particularly important for Open RAN. Which kind of brings me on to why we are interested in investing in software, specifically in the context of diversification. We have a target, as you probably all know, which is to have 35% Open RAN in our telecoms networks. This is the target which all of the mobile network operators have signed up to. And we need to get there through innovation, and software is one of the ways in which we can get there. So the kind of model that we envisage for how funding software leads to diversification is what I've tried to illustrate here, which is where you, the ecosystem, coalesces to research new open network software products and services. You innovate on those products and services, you commercialize them, and then they are adopted by mobile network operators, specifically adopting Open RAN on open networks technology. And in so doing, we meet our target of 35%, and we get to a more diverse telecoms network nationally. Why the RIC specifically? Well, we've identified a number of benefits, which I'm sure you all know about why the RIC is really, really attractive in the software development space, why it's important for Open RAN, and these are kind of just four generally high-level areas, but I think they're sort of some of the main ones, which are the RIC helps with optimizing networks, it helps with automating processes and a number of features in Open RAN. It helps with cost reduction, and it helps with interoperability, which is kind of the name of the game. And I think there are a number of challenges at the same time when it comes to developing the RIC and the ecosystem that we have in the RIC development space. These challenges were highlighted by you, the industry, in our engagement that we did in our research. And there's kind of five high-level things which I want to bring out here. The first is openness. So we're worried about this kind of situation where the RIC is developed by multiple different companies, and you end up with proprietary or closed RICs which threaten development of an open ecosystem. But what we really need is openness in all of the interfaces and in all of the technologies which go into our network. So we need an open RIC as well, which I'll come on to in a second. When you go and layer down into the apps as well, that we identified a lack of interoperability in apps, both X apps and R apps in terms of the RIC, in terms of how you integrate apps into the RIC and get them functioning as quickly as possible, which is something which we need to be able to do much more quickly to make this technology more attractive. There's problems with standards. The standards are underdeveloped in our interfaces. We need to open up these interfaces. There's lack of support for SMEs, which we need to help with, which is why we want to fund software development, especially among SMEs. And when it comes to data sharing and how you train the algorithms, we've identified problems in terms of how operators engage with this whole ecosystem and how they help us on this journey. And these are all things which we really need to address. So that kind of brings me on to my original point, which is about specifically the target of our funding for this theme, which is a bit of a mouthful when you say it all in one go. It's a near real-time open access and interoperable RIC platform and associated XApps. So I've kind of tried to break it down a little bit. So we need to develop a RIC platform and XApps, and it's XApps because specifically we're looking at the near real-time or as close to real-time as possible. And we need this to be open access, both in terms of the RIC, and it needs to be interoperable. Sorry, the RIC needs to be both open access and interoperable, as do the XApps. So it's the whole kind of near real-time ecosystem which we really want to open up as much as possible. As I said, though, this is a priority, but it's not the only thing which we're likely to end up funding. We want to see all types of open and interoperable software development going on. So, if you've got something which meets this bang on, then great, and we want to see it. If you've got something which we haven't thought about, which hasn't been mentioned here, which you think is going to help us on this diversification journey and deploying open networks and Open RAN, then great, and we really want to see that as well. We've got a bunch of different use cases for the RIC, and all of these use cases, and I think Graham actually did a really great job of explaining what a lot of these things can do for us in the Open RAN space, but I just highlighted a bunch of them here. And this is all about, again, making the technology attractive to operators. So things like energy reduction, super important in terms of making Open RAN more attractive, but also just generally bringing down the amount of cost and the energy use that our networks are making. I'm not going to go through all of these, but spectrum management, optimization of coverage, security issues, traffic steering. The RIC covers so many different things. And we're open to all of these things, as well as things which aren't on this list. This is just an indicative list. Last couple of slides. So as I said, we have this issue around public and private operators. I've spoken to a number of people in the development of this concept. We really need data to train these algorithms. And that data is going to come from live networks, right? So it's either going to be public or private ones. A lot of people have been asking me, do we have to have a public operator on board? A lot of the public operators don't necessarily want to work with this quite yet, although some are starting to kind of suggest that they're interested. You don't have to have a public operator, a public MNO on board in order to do this, but I think it would be super helpful if you could get someone on board to do this work. I think it would be really beneficial, which is why also private operators are also fine. And a lot of people have been talking about campus networks being used to train algorithms, and that's also fine. We don't actually have any requirements here. As Graham and Simon said, you can combine HDD software and hardware themes in your bid. So if you've got a kind of product or like an ecosystem of solutions which fit a number of different themes, then that's completely fine. We're really keen to see those kind of ideas as well. As I said, openness and interoperability are really the name of the game here. We really want to make this software and the RIC technology as open and interoperable as possible. And we kind of see you doing that by forming a consortium with a range of different types of organizations. Again, we don't have any specific requirements here. This is just an indicative list. But we imagine that you might want to think about partnering with vendors, obviously, public or private operators, as I said, hyperscalers, cloud service providers, coding houses, RTOs, which is research technology organizations. So that's things like the Catapult network. Other kinds of public entities can be involved as well. Universities or other organizations which you think are going to be really beneficial for developing this technology. And then finally, this is really for you to kind of take away at home. I just wanted to point to this set of text which has been pulled straight out of the guidance. We have, although what I've said and what we've all said time and time again is that this is something we are prioritizing. It's not something that it's not the only thing we're going to fund. However, when it comes to the open near real-time RIC, we have some specific things which we are looking for. So that's things like, so that is this concept of a neutral platform which we can use to develop new X apps, which are themselves open and interoperable, IP which supports this, and then also outcomes out the back end. So overall, we're looking to make Open RAN generally and the software generally more open and interoperable. We also want to bring together the telecoms and the software communities in the UK. So if you can evidence how you're doing that as well, that's really, really helpful. And then again, as I've mentioned, improved engagement among public or private network operators with this specific technology is something which we are really, really keen to see as well. And that is me. So thanks, everyone. And now I'm going to move over to Joe to talk about hardware. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Freddie and Graham. I think Fred's done a really good job summarising our priorities in the HDD and software themes, but now we come on to the real meat of the question, which is the actual hardware, infrastructure, equipment itself. I don't really mean that, of course, everything's equally important, but it does provide a good segue for me to kind of transition to the first thing I wanted to say, which is I'm going to talk about the challenges that, the priority challenges that for the hardware ecosystem. But before I run through those challenges, I first wanted to remind us of why the government is investing in open networks in the first place, and it is, of course, because we want to see a more diverse supply chain for the infrastructure equipment itself. And ultimately, that is the hardware equipment that I'm talking about. And we want it to come from more suppliers than it currently does, or that it is going to, if nothing changes. So this is really what we're describing here, and what we've described in the guidance is really, fundamental to achieving our program's ambition for open interface networks to play a major part in the country's national infrastructure. Of course, we want that to happen. There are various kinds of barriers to that happening. There are barriers to changing the market to be more open. Some of those are commercial in nature, or financial in nature, or about resources, human resources, skills and capability within a company. But some of them are to do with the challenges of advanced technology itself, which is to say that this stuff is just really complex, and that it's just more difficult for new entrants to the market to make progress in these areas than it is for incumbents. So what we're trying to do is help level the playing field as much as we can. And what I'm going to be doing is highlighting some of the key ways in which we think we can do that. And hopefully that will help you understand more about the best way to getting the most out of the funding that we have available to you in the form of grants. Now, what I'm not trying to do is to prescribe what you must do in order to receive hardware, what you must do in hardware in order to receive grant funding, like both Graham and Freddie have said. These are priorities, they're not prescriptions. So what I'm going to cover, and what you'll see in the written guidance as well, it's not meant to be an exhaustive list of what could be done. It's just what we understand to be the most important areas for achieving our objectives for adoption. And what we've been talking about, what I'm going to talk about, is it's based on the experience that we've built up over the past couple of years of the existing grant funding projects, just say the FRANC projects that I'm sure most of you are familiar with by now, and based on feedback from industry, which includes many of you. So hopefully it will align with your understanding and your priorities and your thinking of the market as well. I also wanted to point out that we've undertaken quite a bit of dedicated research into the current state of the open networks market and the ecosystem. And that research has taken into account trends and ambitions, not just for the national public networks, but also for private networks, neutral hosts, and the public sector. So everything that that I'm going to say and has been said, it kind of by default we tend to talk about the MNOs and the national networks, but it does apply to the whole sector as well. So I think that's important to bear in mind. So our ambitions at a high level are to accelerate development and maturity in the areas that you can see on the screen now. So first of all, performance and features of components. That means this is really about making it so Open RAN hardware offers a performance and feature set that is competitive in the real world market, relative to incumbent single vendor solutions. The case for why something is competitive can be made in a number of different ways, and so we're open to different takes on that. How you make that case doesn't just have to be about numbers on a chart showing, extra teraflops or gigabytes or whatever. It could include better compatibility in the software ecosystem, or improving security of components, or something else entirely. Back to the ambition. So second ambition, interoperability, that's referring not only to Open RAN components working with each other, but also working with legacy systems. And total cost of ownership is a major ambition for when it comes to the hardware equipment. And that's really about getting to the point where open solutions are competitive, on total cost of ownership with single vendor incumbent solutions over the course of their lifetime. So that means things like overcoming barriers, like smaller economies of scale, just less maturity, and an increased reliance on third-party integration, because these are all things that are kind of inherent to open networks compared to single vendor ones. And what this is about is closing the gaps, or the perceived gaps, between Open RAN equipment and the status quo, so to speak, so that we'll eventually have a much more diverse group of suppliers in the supply chain, and ultimately more secure and resilient networks as a result. So I'll move on to the priorities themselves. If there was just one hardware priority I had to pick from all the various pieces of feedback and feedback we've received and experience of doing the FRANC project so far, it would be chipsets. And that really goes to the heart of a major challenge of Open RAN, which is ensuring that the hardware equipment itself is able to meet the various performance requirements of the networks in the real world. Now, there are many microprocessors throughout the RAN, and I won't claim to know what they all are, but this is particularly important. There's a microprocessor doing its job diligently as ever. There are many different microprocessors in the RAN, but one area, not one processor, one area of the RAN that's particularly important, but is the baseband unit, which involves a lot of the processing, heavy lifting for communicating with the core network. But when we talk about processors, it's not all about raw performance. Power consumption is a major factor too. That directly impacts the total cost of ownership and the physical form factor requirements as well. And we believe that addressing this challenge, it's a priority to develop chips and server equipment that is specifically designed and optimized for Open RAN deployments or for open network deployments in the real world. The best way to go about that is not something that we're trying to tell you or impose in any way, or even not something I think I know the answer to. There are a variety of approaches that you could take. They span the gamut from commercial off-the-shelf servers running generic CPUs, which is perhaps how open networking was envisioned when the movement first started. You can go from there to all the way to specially designed ASICs on custom servers, and there's various combinations of hardware acceleration in between, and each approach comes with its own set of trade-offs. These are the kinds of issues that have become, or we think will become, barriers, and we want to help the market to progress and eventually solve these. Our priorities are about ensuring that processing needs are met, as I've just described, and that there is competition and flexibility within that sector of the market as well, so that that one platform doesn't dominate. That's because in order to, we want to allow the baseband unit and other areas of processing demand for them to be properly customized, optimized, and innovated on, in the future as well. But it is also about ensuring that performance is competitive and the feature set is competitive with the incumbent solutions from single vendors that we are familiar with. Moving on, software, and this might come as a bit of a surprise. It might seem slightly odd in turning to software now, and my colleague Freddie is just taking you through our software priorities, but I wanted to highlight the fact that optimized software is also a priority for supporting innovation in chipsets and other forms of hardware too. So here I'm talking about software to enable and improve the hardware components, such as the baseband unit, rather than software to manage and improve the network like Freddie was. So if you're considering proposing something that's focused on developing a hardware component of some kind, you should not think that it would be in any way confusing or detrimental to your bid to include a software element, because in fact it would be quite the opposite. So I want to give a few examples of why we're talking software in a hardware section, kind of why it makes sense in order to use software to improve hardware. So some of the things that kind of could happen, but perhaps we don't want to happen, because software has the potential to, to prevent compatibility if it's locked to certain processing platforms. This can stifle development and innovation in the process. Lack of software support can also make it harder to support niche or specialized applications and use cases, such as HDD that my colleague Graham was outlining earlier on. But on the other hand, software has a lot of potential too to enable hardware to reach its full potential, and open source software is something we're interested in particular, as it can unlock some of the principal benefits of Open RAN. It's something that is widely used in other enterprise applications. So we think there's a lot of potential there for helping fully realize the benefits of Open RAN. Now, I talked about chipsets already, about processing platforms, and the number of competing platforms is already, from what we can tell, is already set to grow in the coming years. Talking about baseband processing platforms for open networks, and that's a good thing. However, much of that growth is expected to be based on the ARM architecture, and that's currently less widely supported with optimized software than x86 equivalents, and that's something we believe needs to be addressed, because that has potential to become quite a significant barrier to widespread adoption and commercialization. And we also want to use software in this context to reinforce the principle of openness in Open RAN equipment, because a siloed ecosystem of closed proprietary software support could damage some of the benefits that open networks have the potential to bring, and that's why we're prioritizing openness and portability in the software ecosystem when it comes to Open RAN processing. I've spoken quite a bit about chipsets and the baseband unit and the related software, but I don't want to make it seem like the rest of the hardware in the RAN is not important too, because it is. And during our research and engagement, I'd say the radio unit was the main challenge highlighted to us after chipsets. And within that, power efficiency and feature support were probably the key challenges within that. In the research period that I was referring to, the statistic that jumped out, and you may have seen this before, is that around 40% of the base station's entire power consumption comes from radio unit, and that this tends currently to be more optimized in traditional single vendor systems compared to open ones. So it's a priority to see this addressed for us, and for open radio units to be competitive on power with incumbents. And that has a significant impact on total cost of ownership, which is one of the priorities that I would refer to earlier on. But the same also goes for other performance metrics and the feature set, and also the size, the physical size, weight, dimensions of the thing. They can also impact total cost of ownership when it comes to having to package in cooling requirements and make allowances for those, for example. So anything which impacts total cost of ownership to a large extent is among our priorities. But I've highlighted power consumption because it's likely to continue to put strain on networks, because data traffic is growing, is expected to continue growing, and with it, power consumption grows as well. So that's why we've highlighted this as a priority area for investment. But there's more to it than that. I think it's safe to say that over the past period of, say, 6 months or so that we've been doing this research and developing this competition, that those areas that I've just outlined were our top priorities to focus investment on, but they're not the only ones. We recognize there are other challenges and needs of investment, and I want to make it clear that we are keen to invest in those as well. Chief among those are probably challenges of integration, systems integration. Graham's touched on that already in the context of HDD, and challenges of security. And these are challenges of the wider Open RAN ecosystem too, not just the hardware equipment, but developing hardware infrastructure with these in mind can help solve these challenges. So it's important for us for these to be considered in the same context of development. In systems integration, we conducted quite extensive research in this area and found the main barriers are more challenges to do with insufficient operability, which being what are notionally open components, and challenges with building modern integration skills and capability in the right places in the ecosystem. And of course, the actual task of integration is more complex in an open network in the real world, because they have to live alongside legacy networks. But how the physical equipment is designed will make a real difference in that real world marketplace. When it comes to security and Open RAN, for all its benefits, Open RAN has raised new security concerns. Now, how valid those concerns are, opinions will differ, but they are there. And these challenges are not just around the nature of open technology itself, but they're also to do with commercial issues around whose responsibility is it anyway, and how can security be assured when that responsibility and the data necessary to kind of meet those assurances is split across different organizations. So there's a lot to be learned and progress to be made in these areas too. And challenges like these, alongside things like interoperability and compatibility more generally, are challenges that we see kind of wrapping around the ones that I've already outlined and that you'll see in the guidance. So when it comes to arranging a project consortium, I've tried to visualize it here on this slide. A project's focus might be in one particular component or group of components, like you can see I've outlined there with the dotted lines, but you'll often also need to account for compatibility, both in a physical sense and software-wise, interoperability with other RAN components, ease of integration with legacy systems, and security of the component, both technically and in a practical commercial sense as well. These are always factors that need to be taken into account as well. In conclusion, Simon, a final thought from me on this. In case I've left you feeling less in the know than you were at the start, I just want you to bear in mind that overall objective for hardware is simply to accelerate development and improve maturity and availability. So if you're doing that, then hopefully we can help you work with us and with other colleagues in the ecosystem. So thank you for your time, and I'll hand back to Simon.
Thank you very much, speakers. Just some quick housekeeping. Someone has lost a set of AirPods, and they're tagged to a name Gerald. So there we go. There we go. Okay, so we're just going to go into the next phase of this afternoon's session. The next bit is James, who's going to talk about the application process, which I'm sure is going to be of interest to everyone here. So, James, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm James Boot. I'm a program development lead from the Future Network Programs team at Department 4, even, Science, Innovation and Technology. So you've heard from my colleagues this morning talking through the ins and outs of each of the different technology themes and the scope of those as part of this competition. So I imagine you're all itching to hear about the actual logistics of how to apply, and I'm going to talk you through those, along with some of the eligibility criteria that you and your consortium should be aware of as part of the application process, and some general tips for how to submit a good quality bid to DSIT. So as you can see on this slide, it touches on the sort of key events and deadlines as part of the application competition process, some of which were summarized by Simon earlier this afternoon, but it's always worth reminding you of the key ones. So the ones to be aware of are that the competition closes at 1 minute to midnight on the 23rd of May later this year. Any applications submitted or attempted to be submitted after that time will not go through. So we strongly advise from previous competition experience that you try to submit all of your documentation well in advance of that timeline in case of any last minute IT troubles, as sometimes can happen. Successful applicants will be notified in late June, and we have a mind to start project delivery in September this year, and all projects will close in the 31st of March 2025. So I wanted to go through some more detail about the actual competition application process, as well as the assessment process from DSIT's side. So key thing to flag is that each consortium should have a project lead organization nominated as part of the application process. They'll be overall responsible for the delivery and financial management of projects, and they'll also be responsible for submitting applications to the competition. There's a small change compared to previous competitions. Rather than submitting your required materials to DSIT via an email address, we're instead carrying out the application process via the government's Find a Grant site. So please do make sure that any applications are submitted via that portal well in advance of the deadline. Following competition closure on the 23rd of May, DSIT will then conduct a SIFT against the eligibility criteria for all applications that have been received. Any applications which, for whatever reason, do not meet all of our eligibility criteria will not progress to the next stage of assessment and will be notified at that point in time of our decision not to take them forward. All eligible and in-scope applications will then progress to the triage assessment that DSIT will carry out against the first 2 questions in the application form. These are the ones focusing on the overall objectives of what your project would be looking to deliver against our competition scope and the technical aspects of your projects. All those receiving satisfactory scores to move to the next stage will then have their entire bid assessed. So every single question would then be scored by the DSIT assessment team. Following assessment, DSIT will then notify all applicants of the funding decision and then progress to the GFA mobilization stage for all successful projects. Successful projects should expect to be able to sign a GFA grant funding agreement within 10 weeks of the notification of our funding decision. And all eligible and in-scope applications that have bid into the competition are able to receive assessor feedback upon request from DSIT. So we touched on some of the eligibility criteria. I wanted to go into a little bit more detail about some of the key ones that you should be mindful of when forming your consortia and drafting your bids. So this competition is open to applications from consortia across the UK. Our definition of consortia, so 2 or more organisations drawing funding from DSIT. Consortium partners must be a UK registered business, research and knowledge dissemination organisation, charity, public sector organisation, or research and technology organisation in order to be eligible for this funding. Project work must also be carried out within the UK as part of this competition. Organisations without a UK registered office are not eligible to receive DSIT funding, but are still able to participate in projects without that funding. As has been the case with our previous competitions, high-risk vendors are not permitted to participate in consortia, either as a consortia partner or suppliers to projects. It's also worth noting that organisations which have previously received funding from DSIT programs or are currently receiving funding from them are welcome to participate in this competition, but only with proposals that are clearly new in scope and are adding value beyond their previous project activities. So here's the really interesting stuff. Subsidy control. So all funded projects as part of this competition must be compliant with the UK Subsidy Control Act. So all, as is advised in our guidance, all applying organisations should familiarise themselves with the guidance issued by BEIS earlier this year, which is signposted in relevant areas of our competition guidance. DSIT expects projects to align with the Research, Development and Innovation Streamlined Subsidy category. And the guidance that we signpost clearly sets out the general expectations, allowable expenditure, and details on restrictions under the Subsidy Control Act. This affects the amount of funding that can be allocated to different types of organisation by size, as you can see here on this slide, and also outlines an overall cap on any single supplier receiving a subsidy of more than £3 million. DSIT also expects funded projects to be compliant with the Experimental Development with Effective Collaboration category, which allows for a 15% uplift of the maximum subsidy, which has been taken into account with these percentages on this slide, and as well contributes to DSIT's objectives around collaboration and dissemination of useful knowledge within the telecoms ecosystem. Applicants are also required to obtain their own independent subsidy control legal advice, and successful projects will be expected to share that with DSIT in advance of signing a grant funding agreement. Speaking of those eligible costs that are governed by the subsidy control guidance, I wanted to touch on some key ones to flag with you as part of the application process. Eligible costs are those that you incur during the delivery of your project for which grant funding may be claimed So this could include the costs of your labour, overheads, materials, subcontracts, and travel and subsistence, among other areas. These eligible costs are intended to cover all activities directly associated with the delivery of your project. So some key things to flag as you are preparing your bids are that total subcontracting cost is limited to 30% of the total project costs. No single organisation can incur more than 70% of the total eligible project cost. And for all research organisations and public sector organisations, the total level of project participation is set at a maximum of 30% of the total eligible project costs. If that wasn't enough information for you, we will be staging teach-ins specifically on subsidy control and commercial and finance aspects in April. So I would highly recommend that if you are interested in applying for the competition, you register for attendance of these when the advert goes up on the UK TIN website. I also touched on DSIT's objectives around collaboration and participation. So we class collaboration as the interworking with other publicly funded projects, participation through UK TIN channels, and the wider ecosystem on topics of shared interest. Our aim is that by combining the efforts of projects and their knowledge bases, producing tangible and useful outputs that can be shared and demonstrated, the collaboration activities will help to foster the UK and international telecoms ecosystems. DSIT will monitor collaboration between projects, facilitate partnerships to support these efforts where appropriate. Project partners must also sign the OMP project participation agreement as part of the grant mobilisation process, and will be expected to work very closely with our colleagues at UK TIN in order to promote their work on the national and international stage. So you might have seen in our application guidance that there are a number of mandatory documents to be submitted as part of your application. I'm not going to go into the ins and outs of each of these right here and now, but this is essentially your reminder that there's a lot that we're asking for good reason, and that in order to be eligible, you must make sure that you are ticking all of these boxes and submitting all of the documentation that we are asking for in the format that we ask for. These things, of course, include the application form itself with all questions answered within the word count, ideally, plus all allowed appendices. Project commercial forms for all project partners, covering the proposed costs for the entire duration of the project. 2 years of latest accounts for all partners within the consortium. And there are also a number of documents that we ask for to support the assessment of specific questions within the application form. So namely, the project plan and risk register that we ask for helps to support our confidence in your ability to deliver the project from mobilisation to closure and effectively manage risks. That will aid our assessment of the delivery section of the application form. The intellectual property plan, which will explain your ambitions around patents and retaining IP resulting from your work, will help us to assess the second section of the assessment form around benefits and outcomes. And of course, to aid our assessment of financial and commercial aspects, we ask you to detail the finance and commercial roles within your consortium, break down work packages by cost, and to submit a set spend profile by month. I just wanted to also share some general tips around how to write a good quality application. Now, these may look like common sense, but we've done a number of competitions, and it's worth reiterating these, I think. First of all, read the guidance and all of the associated documents carefully. There is a lot of material, and we do appreciate there's a lot of material to digest as part of the competition guidance process, but DSIT has done their best to try and spell out exactly what we want to see in terms of a good quality bid So please do sort of work with us on providing the information we ask for to help us with our assessments and get the most out of these projects that we're looking to fund. I would also ask that you use straightforward language and communicate your plans clearly and succinctly. Assessors can tell when a response is more jargon than substance, and it certainly won't get you a higher score if it makes their job harder in terms of assessing and understanding what you're actually looking to achieve. And finally, don't go over the word limits. So we have got word limits attached to each of the different questions within the assessment, within the application form. Assessors have been instructed not to review bids beyond the word limit. So it will be highlighted when they receive those bids if anything is over the limit, and they will disregard that. And that is because assessors may have to read dozens of bids. So we have to be very careful about how much work we're giving them, because we don't want to blow their tiny minds with too much to assess. But they won't read beyond the word limit because that could unfairly advantage those who, against those who have adhered to the rules, essentially. I also wanted to touch on the process for questions and clarifications over the course of the competition window. If you do have any questions or require any more clarification, please do contact us on onp.inquiries@dcms.gov.uk. There will be a public Q&A document live on the gov.uk website, which we will regularly update with questions received along with our responses, which will be anonymized wherever there are any details reflecting a specific organisation. And we'll share that information with all people looking to apply so that everyone has access to the same information. And worth reiterating again that the deadline for submitting clarification questions is the 9th of May. So please do submit anything you have before that date. I think that is all from me. So I think that leads quite neatly into the Q&A section of today's agenda. So I'll hand over to Simon to lead that, and thank you all very much and good luck with your applications.
Thank you very much, James. Could I invite the panel up, please? And with the moderators, please grab microphones, both in person and online. Okay, so you've had a lot of information today already. I'm guessing there's probably led to quite a few questions from individuals. Do we have a show of hands at all from the floor? Yes, there's a gentleman down here. Kate, if you could do the honours. Before we do that, I should probably just introduce the panel and the experts we have on here. We have James, who's looking after the application process, Joe on the hardware, RAN hardware, Graham on HDD, Freddie on software, Dale, who's the commercial lead on any legal issues around this and the application process. And then we have Ed at the end, who's one of our technical advisors, if some of the questions get a little bit deep. Please, sir.
Okay, thank you. This is not going to be a deep question, guys. So John Oakus from Rail Wireless. I always enjoy writing the public explanation. Looking forward to doing that for recaps and so on. But that's not my question. My question is the first two questions in the application are triaged, which I assume means you're in or you're out. Given there's 3 topics, and each of those topics, both here and in the document, are quite well expanded to say you can go beyond the edges here. Can you explain how the triage works, please?
Do you want to take that?
I certainly can. I assume you can hear me. So the triage process, as you said, quite rightly identified, is against those first 2 questions. So the overall objectives and what you're looking to deliver, as well as the technical aspects. Those are sort of quite all-encompassing kind of questions that give us a good view as to what you're looking to deliver, and so that's why those are the triage questions. So essentially, the assessment panel will review those 2 questions as part of that initial assessment, score them according to our scoring matrix, which is also detailed in the competition guidance. So a score of 0 to 7, 7 being the top. And we've assigned a scoring threshold for that triage of 4. So I believe that is like a moderately good response. It's sort of on the sort of 50-50, on the cusp, really. So anything lower than that is not enough to progress to the next stage, essentially. And so that's how the triage works. They'll be assessed against those 2 questions, and if they both score 4 or above, they'll go to the next round.
Thank you.
That's great, thank you. Anyone else on the floor here? Yes, gentleman in red, thank you.
Thank you. I'm John Redding, Parallel Wireless. So I was just wondering, if you were receiving grants from the Frank projects at the moment, but you want to continue them to raise your TRR level, I think that there's potentially a slightly different application process, and there are slightly different rules with regards to the commercial impact of that. Are you able to give any more information on that?
Frank application, I mean, Dale, do you want to, you're probably closely involved with that.
I mean, it depends on kind of how far you're straying away from the Frank project to start off with, as to whether it'd be more appropriate to put in a change request for that additional work, or whether it is something that's so fundamentally different or significantly more funding, and then it'd be more appropriate to put in the bid. But if you speak to your project manager, we can have a discussion and guide you on what's more appropriate in your circumstances.
Thank you. I think I kind of know which is more appropriate, but I just wondered, kind of, as an example, entities are able to submit applications for up to 3 million for a new project, but is there any information on the kind of funding limits for existing projects?
For existing projects, it would be kind of a maximum above what your current funding level is. I think that would be 50% overall, but we've only got a certain amount in relation to the scheme that we can grant in addition to funds already granted. So yeah, it will depend.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any online at all questions? We do.
Yeah, there's quite a few. Actually.
Okay, great. Could we switch to the online mic, please?
Yeah. Okay. So I've got 2 along similar lines. Do all the participants need to be UK registered? And if not, how do non-UK registered companies get involved?
James, you want to take that?
Yes, certainly. So yes, so all participants in the project, all project partners need to be UK registered. In regards to the process of being registered, I think, Dale, you might be able to speak to that a little bit more than I can.
I mean, non-UK registered companies can be subcontractors into a project. That would be the kind of most obvious way to be involved, unless they wanted to be a non-funded partner, in which case that's acceptable. We just can't give subsidy.
Okay. Shall I continue?
Go ahead, yeah.
Okay. So can you apply if you have identified a project which may suit one of your 3 use cases, but the proposed project builds upon a government-funded asset such as fibre?
Who wants to take that one?
Can you repeat that one?
Yeah. Can you apply if you have identified a project which may suit one of your 3 use cases, but the proposed project builds upon a government-funded asset such as fibre?
Fundamentally, I think the answer to that is yes. So, like, if you were plugging something into a fibre network that already exists, Open Reach, for instance, that'd be fine.
Okay, fine. Okay, we've got a number of people trying to advertise their services, so I'm going to skip over those ones. x86 and ARM processors I mentioned. Does RASC-V have a role to play as well? It features a custom compute architecture that's particularly suitable to optimize for energy efficiency.
Ed?
Yes, is the correct answer.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Fine. All right. This is one for you guys. With the summer holidays, will DSIT and partners be able to respond in a timely manner to hit the 10-week plan? I'm just reading it as it's written.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
We have, I mean, you know, James outlined it that we have planned for this, and we've planned our availability of resources inside the program. So summer, it will not be an issue for us. I kind of put the question back to all of you. Will you all also be available this summer? Yeah.
Okay. For HDD, is it required to demonstrate a specific application scenario in the end, i.e. to have a public trial?
Graham.
If I understand the question right, you will be expected to do a live trial or a live demonstration or a live network deployment in a particular area, and that is part of the entry level for the HDD bit.
Okay. Okay.
We'll take one more virtual and then we'll go back to the floor.
Sure. Actually, we might want to move back to the floor because I need to sort through a couple of these first.
Okay, I did see a couple of hands going up. Mr. Scales.
Me? Yeah. Couple of questions. So first one is there a maximum value that a consortium can bid for?
Consortium can bid for between 1 million and 10 million.
Okay, thank you. Second question is, you've talked about a live network in the HDD section. Can you explain what you mean by a live deployment? What does that mean?
A live HDD deployment. Graham?
Does it need to be commercial, in other words?
Can you explain what you mean by a live deployment?
Live deployment. Presumably a network that is deployed on a network that is used by consumers of some type. I can kind of.
So real end customers. Is that the definition?
Like not
is there a definition of it? That's the question.
Yeah, I think if you have, if there are particular questions, I think if the requester has particular things in mind, like is X or Y allowable, that's linked to a particular use case, and I sort of encourage you to sort of ask questions about that through the email form, just so that we can be sure we're giving you the right information.
Thank you.
Just to go back to your first question as well, Tony, there is a maximum of 3 million for any one organisation in addition to the 1 to 10 million for bids.
Yeah, I saw that. Thanks, Dan.
I think, Keith, did you want to make a comment on that?
Asking a question of my own team here as much as anything else, but on this question about what constitutes live, I guess, would it be fair to say that our ambition and our ideal situation would, of course, be something that's being tested in a fully live environment, but if we get bids that are doing it perhaps in a more trial-like sort of situation, and that is the best we can get, as long as it's meeting the aims, Graham, that it is, I guess, providing a comparator between, a test, a good test of how well the Open RAN equipment is performing in that environment, then that's not going to be ruled out. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so. It depends what we mean by live here. And hopefully I sort of covered it a bit in my talk. There's a sort of live, which is live as in, a full outdoor public MNO network in an HDD area. Now, that could be a scenario, but it's not the only live scenario we're looking at. As I said in the talk, there are other deployment scenarios which could be taken to be reasonable proxies for the performance of those full networks that we can still learn lessons from and still use as environments in which we can help mature open RAN technologies. These could be private networks, these could be neutral hosts, they could be fixed wireless access. I think in your applications, we'd like you to make the link between why these are fair, why these are representative environments, how using these environments can help us learn more about the challenges of a full public deployed network. But it is possible to use those sort of lower grade ones where we're just testing. So I hope that makes it clear.
Okay, hopefully that covered that section there. Yes, the gentleman at the back, please.
Hi, can you perhaps clarify a bit on the review process and the panel, and whether the panel will be published?
The review process, Dale, do you want to take a stab at that one?
What do you mean by review process? Do you mean the moderation of bids?
Yeah.
No, we don't publish the outcomes for each individual bid. We only publish those that are successful, and we don't publish scores in relation to those publicly.
Who's doing the moderation?
It's a range of people across the department. So for the technical aspects, we've got technical advisors like Ed to support us. Commercial and finance, it will be myself, the commercial and finance team. Delivery questions, we have a series of delivery professionals, and then there's a couple of other bits, and it's the relevant professionals within the department. It will all be assessed by civil servants or contractors to the department.
Okay. Ish.
Thanks, Simon. James or Dale, I was wondering if you could tell me if there are any, I know there's an IPR framework document to be put in as a part of the application, but do you have any minimum guidance on what IPR, what do you define as IPR, and how do you best put a sort of a threshold around that?
Definition of IPR.
Yeah, so I can't talk too much about IPR as that's a section of the guidance that's been developed by other colleagues within DSIT. However, there is a piece of the competition guidance that talks about our expectations of what would be good to see in that section. If, of course, you require any more clarification on that, we can go back to our colleagues in DSIT and come up with some more clarity as to what our expectations are, what would make a good IPR plan. And we can include that as part of the clarification log that goes up on the cover.
Okay, I'll read the guidance. Thank you.
Thank you. Should we take one online?
Sure. Can you confirm the subsidy levels available for public sector, charity, university, etc.? Can they claim 100% of the costs?
Subsidy levels, who wants to take that?
I suppose it's me. It depends on which category they fall into. So universities are typically 80%. Research technology organisations are 100%. Charities and other public sector bodies, it depends on the way in which they're acting in relation to the funding. So a charity acting in a charitable way would be 100%. But if it is acting in a way that would be the same as an undertaking, it's the percentages listed earlier. Local authorities will typically be 100% as well, which is the main category of public sector organisation we fund.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another one? Okay. A 60% funded project with the requirements of being in a consortium is very limiting to startups. If the overall aim is to progress Open RAN and the wider telecoms R&D community in the UK, can these requirements be looked at given the merits of certain projects?
Sadly, we're kind of bound by legislation.
Okay.
I don't think that it's within DSIT's risk appetite to go beyond what Bayes published.
Fair enough. Do you want another one, or should we go
I'll
back?
take one more and then we'll go back to the floor. Yeah.
There is the opportunity to subcontractors, Ed pointed out, so they could subcontract into a consortium, but obviously there's a limit on the extent of subcontracting within any bid.
Okay. As mentioned, one of the funding focuses is on silicon RF and the other RAN hardware. My question is, the technology needs to be SI based, and are you referring to SI CMOS?
Do you want to take that one, Joe?
I'm not sure I quite grasp what the question is asking, apart from the last part was on systems
integration.
Is that right? And whether that's included?
Yeah, I could ask the questioner to clarify.
Right.
Yeah. So, but I mean, on systems integration, so doing something which advances the kind of the state of the art or the maturity of systems integration in open networks, whether it's on a hardware or software basis or a combination, is very much like within the boundaries of what we would like to see.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Any more from the floor? Yes.
Hi, James knows how much I love process. So this is a question about GFAs. At Telet, we've got really good at GFAs, and we learned the lessons that Keith was talking about, the first one, and have somebody in place to finance somebody process. And we got our last GFA down to 3 months, and we were the fastest one to get it through. If you look at other projects, it took UK Tin, 6 months to get their GFA through? You look at the Create projects, they slipped from September to January for their launch. Is there anything we can do to accelerate the GFA process? I'm thinking particularly, could we have a workshop where we got everyone involved, because I hate the word stakeholders, in one room and just thrashed it out, rather than the toing and froing that takes forever?
I think you quite rightly identified that, it's not just Telet that have learned from previous experience. DSIT have also learned from their previous experience with projects. We've cut down the amount of time that projects tend to take in order to sign GFAs dramatically over the course of the previous program that we ran with 5G testbeds and trials. And I think we've put all of those learnings into the guidance and process that we're undertaking for this competition. So I think that the 10-week expectation is perfectly reasonable. I think it's within the guidance that all projects have identified their mobilization team, as part of their applications. So who's going to be leading on the commercial aspects, who's going to be leading on financial from their sides. And I think that's a useful learning that we're taking forward as part of this.
Okay, I remain to be convinced.
We've only got a few more minutes. This gentleman here. Thank you.
Thank you. Izzat Darwaza from University College London. I've got 2 questions and a comment. One question is I presume a lot of these projects are expected to be industry-led, not university-led. Or is there any restriction on the leadership of any of these projects?
There's no restriction on who can lead a project.
Okay, thank you. So the second question specifically on the RF part. So thank you, the presentation was interesting, but there wasn't much RF in it. So there is quite serious RF work in the country, both in industry and academia. And much of the RF work, if it were to go into projects like this, it will have to be at low TRL level. It never is at high TRL level if it were to have any impact. So how flexible are you about TRL levels? I mean, if we're looking at something which is closer to the R and D or closer to the R than it is to the D, how suitable would that be for these projects?
The presentation kind of reflects what we've heard. So you're right that RF didn't feature in it that much. That's based on the feedback that we've received over the past few months. But I tried to make it clear, and I'll reiterate now, that it is still among our priorities. Like, we do recognize how important it is. As regard TRL levels, we are flexible, is what I would say. With I think what you're articulating about RF is that it's different for different aspects of the technology and different parts of the RAN, and we have not set limits or goals on TRL levels for any of the different aspects of the projects that we're looking for here. So it is absolutely possible to make the case for something at lower TRL levels. Like I stated in the presentation, it's about accelerating development and maturity broadly. That's kind of it. So yes, we are flexible.
Thank you. And
that's great. We've just got time for one more question. The gentleman at the back, please. We do have the mailbox, and we are here for the rest of the afternoon as well.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Amol from Mavenir. Based on your past experience, how many participants you expect in the consortium? Is there any limit?
Number of participants in a consortium in the past, how many have we?
There's no limit. I mean, we've got consortiums as low as 2 and as high as I think, 17, I think, through our last competition. You might want to think about how manageable that is as a lead partner.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I know that was short, but we got a lot to pack in this afternoon. We've got some very interesting and exciting consortium presentations. Mr. Driver is going to lead the next session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Everybody, let's get down to business, shall we? We've got 12 presentations from real companies that want to talk about stuff. And I'm going to talk about, first of all, just very briefly, because I'm standing in between you and the companies, some top 10 tips on building a consortium. And these actually date from 2020, believe it or not. I think, Keith, you'll be very familiar with these, because we built them together, I think, and they were also advertised in the Innovation magazine, edited by Simon back in the day. So we've had lots of information on how to put together a great bid, but it's worthwhile looking beyond that as to actually how to build a great consortium. So 10 top tips, and I'll go through them really, really quickly. First of all, project leadership. One person that's in charge of the project is really important. You need day-to-day leadership. You need to have that person in charge. You need a project figurehead. It's a public money you're getting. So it's important to be able to explain to other people what you're doing and why you're doing it. So sometimes a project leader isn't the same as a project figurehead. Sometimes they're the same person, often they're not. You need to have communication capability. So how to present, what is the content of what you're presenting to the public as you go through the project. Project management, things will go wrong. It's a project, things are going to go wrong. You're going to have to adapt. You're going to have to be agile. So you're going to have a effective management, and that means the ability to deal with change. You also think about actually what you're trying to do. Don't try and put in too many use cases, too many tasks into the project you're trying to do. Do one thing and do it well if possible. Also, if you've got a large consortium or even a considerable consortium, even a small consortium, make sure that you've got your approvals processes internally sorted out. And don't underestimate the amount of requirements that DSIT will put on you when it comes to presenting your information and providing information. Obviously, it's public money and it's got to be stewarded in the right way. Openness and access to partners. If you've got a lead organisation, there'll always be a lead organisation. That organisation shouldn't be a block to the other participants in the partnership. Also, something I think is probably particularly appropriate for HDD deployments, sometimes this is outside. These deployments are outside in the real world, and you need to think about planning permission and those sort of real world issues of putting stuff on masts and what have you. Actually, that can cause a lot of delay. And one of the features of this competition is there ain't much time. So you've got to think about that too. And then finally, size of, last but one, size of consortia. We've already covered this actually in the questions earlier on. Be careful of having very large consortia. They can be very difficult to manage, and you need to be wary of that. And actually, I think I do remember one of the consortia for the 5DQT program. There was about 30 organisations, and it was quite challenging, I think. Finally, and last but not least, don't forget this bit, because it's probably the most important bit of all. It's legacy and commercialisation. Right from the beginning, you've got to think about how this stuff is going to actually be commercialized in the real world. So those are top 10 tips. They might seem pretty obvious, but actually they're easy to forget. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go through a process with 12 companies. I think they all know the order that they're coming in. They're all going to get 4 minutes to talk about what they've got to say. And I think, is it Sophie? Sophie's going to put up the notice. It says 1 minute remaining. And then after that 1 minute, I come along and drag you off, basically. So all in good spirits, but we do need to keep to time. Also, just before I ask for the first person to come up and present, I wanted to say that UK Tin has a specialist from the Supplier Specialist Service, Supplier Support Service, that we're putting into place. And they're happy to help you if you're looking for a partner or you want some introductions. Obviously, there's lots and lots of people from DSIT here that can help you. But if you want to have some commercial discussions, talk to Tim Osbaldon, who's at the back there, and stand up with Tim, and Roger. Where's Roger? And Roger over here. So if you want to talk to either of those two gentlemen from UK Tin, they can help you, and so you can talk to them afterwards.